this is the Provoked Prawn, and in this video I'm going to show you everything that's included with the NZXT C1200 Gold power supply unit. This is an ATX 3.0 PSU, which makes it perfect for NVIDIA's latest 40 series graphics card because it comes with that all-important 600 watt cable, and it has a modular setup which enables you to connect up multiple different devices. And I'm going to show you all the cables and all the things that you'd connect them up to, where they plug into, and more. So stick with me as I show you and demonstrate these various things. Now, I will quickly caveat this by saying it's worth checking whether you actually need 1200 watts of power in your system. I'll leave a link to a PSU calculator in the description, which will talk about wattage and how much your system actually needs depending on what you're using, and it's worth checking that before you purchase if it's not too late already. But here is the setup process for it. So this is a modular power supply, which means you only need to plug in what you're actually going to be using, but the most important cable of those for every build that you're doing with a PC is the 24-pin motherboard power supply cable. On the PSU end, this is split into two ports. You can see that in the top left here, and that plugs in with two different connectors. And now it's important that you use this one and that you secure all of these firmly. There's clips on top that will pop into place when you push them in. The other end of this plugs in on the right-hand side of your motherboard. Now I'm doing this outside the case for demonstration purposes to make it easy to see, but obviously you will do this actually when everything's mounted in your case. You plug it into the PSU and then you plug the other end into the motherboard. Again, you need to make sure this is well secured. This is the most important cable to give your motherboard the power it needs to turn on. So if it's not plugged in properly, your PC won't boot. You can only put it in one way around though, and there is a clip to hold it into place so it will click when you've secured it properly. The next is the CPU cables. You'll see these marked as CPU. There's two of those, and we'll plug those in at the top right where it says CPU and PCIe. This enables you to plug into the motherboard. Now this is going to vary from case to case because you might not need two on your motherboard depending on what motherboard you've got. I'm using the NZXT motherboard here, which requires one 8-pin and one 4-pin. So I'm plugging in two different cables, and then they run to the top left of this motherboard. You may find them on different positions on your motherboard depending on the manufacturer, but you can see one of those 8-pin cables plugs in there, and then the other one actually splits into two parts. So you've got one lot of 4 pins that connects up. There's actually an effect here where it's split into two, but don't worry about that. You'll just need to tuck that out of the way. And then you have the power for the motherboard fully set up. Now, from case to case, this may vary. Different motherboards may require two. Some may require just one. It varies, but you have the cables there to plug those in. The next is the SATA power connection. These are the flat power connectors that you can see here. This plugs in the peripheral and SATA connectors on the bottom left row of the PSU. So you plug that in, again, push it all the way in. Now this is used for a variety of things. Fan controllers, so with the H9 Elite case from NZXT that I'm building in, you can use that for the fan controller in there. It gives the power to the fans. It's also used for SSDs and hard disk drives, so you can see me using it here with a Kingston SSD that I've got here, and it's a simple connector. It has a little L shape to it, so you can only plug it in one way, so it's a little bit fiddly to get it the right way around, but then it's plugged in. You can actually connect up multiple devices to a single cable as well, because you can see there's more than one connection on that. So here you can see the NZXT fan controller, controls both RGB lighting and fan power for NZXT's Duo fans. These are the F120 Duos, and there's a cable there that plugs in. But this will work with any controller, so there's lots of different ones. Corsair has a RGB controller, for example. That again needs SATA power. Then we have the PCIe connections. This is for traditional graphics cards from both NVIDIA and AMD. And this plugs into the PCIe markings. So you can see the CPU and PCIe markings in the top right and in the bottom row. And you plug that cable in, and then you plug the other end into your graphics card. Now, I'm going to show you two demos here. One of an RTX 3090 and another of an RTX 4080. These are two different graphics cards with two different setups. So this is the Gigabyte 3090 card. It requires two 8-pin power supply connections, and you can see them here. Now, ideally, you'd use two separate cables for this to make sure it gets the right amount of power, but you can also use it in this sort of daisy chain setup where you have two sort of pigtail connectors that will plug in. You do have enough cables to use two separate cables if you want to, and so you do have the option to do that. But you can see plug these in and connect them up. You do need to pinch those cables together because they are split into parts. So some graphics cards require 3 of these 8-pin connections. Some require 1 8-pin, 1 6-pin. Some require just 1 8-pin, so it's going to vary. Again, you only need to plug in the cables that you're actually going to be using, so it's worth thinking about which cables you're going to need before you set up your power supply unit, before you install everything in your case, and that way you can keep the number of cables in your case to a minimum and make cable tidying a lot simpler. Now, if you're using a 40 series graphics card, you have this 600 watt power supply cable you use instead of the one I just showed you. So you don't need the PCIe cables. Instead, you need this one. And this has a unique plug-in location on the bottom right-hand side. And it clips in with a small clip. And you'll notice there's quite a bit of a difference in this. So you can't plug it in the wrong place, which is great. And then that runs through into your case and then connects up to a 40 series graphics card from NVIDIA. And in this case, the Zotac 4080 that I'm using here. And I'll show you a close-up of that connector because it looks the same on both ends. So both on the power supply and on the graphics card end, it's the same. It has a number of different pins on it and then some small ones. Very, very important that you make sure that both ends are secured firmly, both to the graphics card and the PSU. And also that you're very careful not to bend the cable when you install it, because that can lead to fire hazards, has been shown by Gamers Nexus. Now, the next one is this peripheral cable. This is rarely used, I find. It really depends on your build, but again, this plugs in the peripheral section, and you can see the design of this and what it looks like. This is traditionally used for DVD drives in the past, but also sometimes for other things. So if you're using a liquid-cooled system with a custom loop build and you have a pump reservoir combo like this one from Corsair, you might find that that has that sort of style power connector on it. So you can see that here. So that's the instance you'd use that. If you don't have anything like this, then you might not need that cable, which means you don't need to install it, which is great. Now, I'd highly recommend plugging in all the cables that you're going to be using into the power supply unit before you go about installing it in your case. This makes life a lot easier, especially if you're installing on a smaller case with not much space in it, because it means that you don't have to worry about what cables have gone where and where you need to plug the cables in and trying to fiddle around with it in the back of a case that hasn't got much space and trying to see the labels. Just connecting it all up properly. So you can plug it all in beforehand and then install the power supply in the case. The other important thing to bear in mind is the positioning. So in this case, the rear panel has a lot of holes in it to let air flow through. What happens here is the power supply has a fan on it with holes on top that sucks cold air into the power supply to cool it down. Blows hot air out the rear where the power button is to turn it on and off. Make sure you mount it in the right direction. In most instances, you'll find the power supply actually mounts on the bottom of the case with the fan facing down towards the bottom to suck cold air into it. You then have 4 screws that you then secure it to the case with, and those are included both in the case, usually box, and also the power supply unit box. Now, obviously, with it in place, we run those cables in the right direction to where they need to go. So you can see I've run the 2 8-pin CPU connectors up to the top for the top left of the motherboard. The 24-pin is routed through the middle to go into the side of the motherboard. And then you tie them down with Velcro ties and other things. But we also need to make sure they're secured properly in place. So again, just so you can see the process for it, the 24-pin plugs in on the right hand side here. I have to fight a little bit with the cable hiding tray in this case. By the way, if you want to see the full build guide on this case, check out the link in the description. This is the NZXT H9 Elite, which is a fantastic case to build in, by the way. And then you can plug in the 2 8-pin power connectors on the top left. Now I have a vertical mounting bracket for the 4080 just to make it look a little bit nicer. Once that's secured in place, again, that 600 watt power supply cable pops in, and in this instance it's actually at the top. But again, just keep in mind that you can't make this taut, so be really careful not to sort of pull this to a funny angle, because it can be very sensitive, and there actually has been some problems with fires being caused in early builds with these 40 series graphics cards where those cables weren't secured. So make sure all your cables are firmly secured, and then you'll end up with a beautiful and happy build. Hopefully this has been useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, and check out the description for more information. Thanks very much for watching. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate you. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and give me a thumbs up because that really helps. Drop a comment down below if you've got any questions, and watch these other videos. And most importantly, have a great life. This has been the Provoked Prawn, signing off.